So I'm 16 years old now and living in a duplex with my family, which consists of 3 younger brothers all under 5, my 18-year-old sister, and my mother and father. About 3 years ago, when we lived in our old apartment, I was home alone for the entire day. This was pretty normal as my father worked in the summer. My mom would take the kids out to do things like swimming and other things like that. I usually just slept in, and I had a small list of chores that I had to do during the day before everyone came home. One of those happened to be laundry. The way that the apartment is set up is on each level there's about 20 places where people live, and only one laundry room shared amongst us. I lived a few doors down from it, and I had to pass the door to the stairs in order to get to it, which that door had a little window. I was going to throw the clothes from the washer into the dryer when I then heard a clicking noise. I wasn't really sure what it was, but for a second I decided to listen before it then stopped. I was always really freaked out from that apartment, and this definitely wasn't helping. I finished throwing the laundry into the dryer and then started it. Then I started walking down the hall when I then heard that same clicking noise yet again. I froze. It sounded like it was coming from the stairwell. So as scared as I was, I looked out the window, and to my surprise, I didn't see anyone. Really relieved, I booked it down the hall to my apartment. I closed and locked the door, going about the day again, or so I tried. When it's quiet in that apartment, you can really hear everything. Conversations, footsteps, laughing, everything, especially from the hallway, and that's where the most crap was heard. I was in the kitchen feeding my animals when I heard slow, heavy footsteps in the hall. It sounded like they were coming down the hall right outside of the apartment. I decided to run to the living room and mute the TV so that I could listen, when I then heard 3 loud bangs at my door. I was kind of crapping my pants at this point, not really knowing what to do. I kept the TV muted and slowly moved my way to the door, looking out the peephole. I was horrified at what I saw. It was a black figure standing with its back towards me. I didn't know what to do, and I was frozen in place. And then, I heard a familiar sound. That same bizarre clicking sound that I heard before. I noped the hell out of there and grabbed my animals, then hid in my room. I mean, I was really scared, but I was starting to wonder if it was really nothing. I usually listen to scary stories just like these to scare the crap out of me, but maybe something was actually there. Later in the evening, when my sister arrived home, I told her about what I saw because she's really into supernatural things like that. When I told her what I saw, the color from her face ran away. She said something along the lines of seeing that same figure, but in dark rooms and hallways, not lit ones. The next time I encountered it, I was sleeping on the bottom bunk and my sister in the top. The clock read 3:37 a.m., the fan was going, and the nightlight was plugged in. My sister was sound asleep at this point. I heard the clicking again, but this time quieter and from under the bed. One of my cats on my bed didn't seem to notice it, so I figured maybe I was just imagining it. That was until I then noticed a long black, bony cold arm then reach out and start making its way right up to my bed. I then yelped, enough to wake up my sister, but no one else. Pretty groggily, she just tells me to shut up and that she's trying to sleep. "But you gotta see this," I say as I look down and notice the thing's gone now. I didn't catch an ounce of sleep that night. I have lots of other terrifying stories from that hellhole apartment, but I think most of them revolve around that thing. Ever since I moved, I haven't had anything weird happen since. I'm just really glad that thing never followed me to my new house. Thank God for that.
Number 2. When I was a kid, I was living with my grandma in an apartment complex in a very poor area. It was a really bad neighborhood, but my granny and I were living in the nicer part, which really isn't saying much. The apartment complex was really small, 3 floors and 12 apartments all in all. But as the neighborhood wasn't exactly friendly, neither were the neighbors. We hardly knew anyone in the complex. People were constantly moving in and out before you even had a chance at saying hello. But then again, the few people we did say hello to were either creeps or criminals. I don't think we were missing out on much. The complex had a huge basement, and each apartment had their own room in the basement. The basement also had a laundry room. The entire basement was creepy as fuck, but it was really quiet down there most of the time. But anything going on in the complex would eventually manifest into sounds in the basement. On top of that, the heater, which was also down there too, was always making this sound like a dying cat, and every pipe and floorboard down there was really creaky. As a young child, my granny didn't allow me to go down there on my own. Not that I ever wanted to. Even before this particular incident, plenty of bad stuff had happened down there. People would often use the basement for illegal activities or to store drugs. A lot of people would move away without cleaning out their rooms, leaving behind the stuff to be found by the landlord. One time the landlord found a meth lab. Another time he found a batch of dead dogs, which apparently had been alive when the resident of the room had been living in the complex, but had starved to death once he had moved out. Anyways, I was 14 when I was first allowed down in the basement on my own. My grandma was getting old, and I was taking over more and more responsibilities at home. Doing laundry was always my biggest terror. Yet as time went by, I got more used to the sounds and the creaks down there. The basement was just a tiny bit less creepy. When I was 15, my grandma had won a new dining room table. Being the old-fashioned hoarder she was, she didn't want to part with her old set. Instead, she wanted it down in our basement room, which of course rested on my shoulders. I went down to our basement with a few chairs, and then into our room. That was when I first heard the noise. The reason I noticed it was that it was unlike any of the noises I usually heard down there. It was repetitive and seemed to have a pattern to it, not like the other noises, which seemed to be random. The noise was strong in our room, but not outside of it, like someone was knocking on the walls in the room next to ours. I put my ear to the wall, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. I remember thinking that perhaps it was rats or pests running around inside the walls. Like that, the pattern was even more obvious. 3 short knocks, then 3 long knocks, followed by 3 more short knocks. I immediately had the feeling like I heard that pattern before, but couldn't quite put my finger on why. I went back up to my grandma and asked her about it. She reminded me that it was Morse code for SOS, which she had taught me a long time ago. I told her I heard it down in the basement, and she went down there with me to investigate. When she heard it too, she called the police. Well, the police showed up with the landlord, then had each resident open their basement room. The residents that weren't home or otherwise unavailable had their basement rooms kicked open. In one of the rooms, the police found one of those big old-fashioned closets. Think of the one from the first Narnia movie. Inside they found a young woman who had been abused, starved, and pretty much tortured. The owner of the room was an elderly man who was living in the apartment above ours. As it turns out, she had been down there for at least 5 days, and while a lot of other people had apparently heard the noise, no one else had recognized it as an SOS signal.